Welcome to our panel discussion. The stage is yours. As it's that guy.
Yeah, I wish I was the beautiful guy beside me, but I'm not.
So yeah, welcome to the panel discussion here. I have a requirement document in my hands for this panel discussion. We want to discuss a recurring theme in Agile transitions tonight. What is the smallest next step to more agility? So there are several approaches out there. There are people who propose a process-centric and top-down view. The whole process is heavily scripted and tries to incorporate a lot of experience from past transitions, mainly in the software industry. And also we find a growing Agile experience in other industries than software and IT. Tomorrow we have a presentation about public administration and self-organized learning on Scrum-Day, or in mechanical engineering, so a completely different industry. So different context and different needs. This morning we could listen to a keynote from somebody who said, okay, talked about an open and invitation-based change. So there doesn't seem to be an ideal way, and maybe we need more time to agree widely and on good transition patterns, and so what might be the next smallest step to more agility. So we want to discuss this with some people on the stage, and let me begin with Wolfram Nogge here. He's a colleague of us. He is first he presents the user voice of not so agile companies. Wolfram, you are a trainer, you are a consultant, you have lots of experience with Scrum, you helped lots of companies, should I say that? So very big companies who have a history in Germany with Agile transition. One objection always against more agility is Agile works only with the right people. You can't be Agile without the right people. So a warm welcome to Wolfram Nogge here.
I would like you to introduce you to our second panelist, which is Christina Schack. I just asked you 2 minutes ago about your last name, and I think I got it wrong still. We met each other yesterday on the workshop with Daniel Mezick when we were talking about open space agility, and we did an exercise, and this exercise was debate in between the different concepts of making a command and control top-down agile transition compared to having it in an agile way, finding your way through experiments. And Wolfram and Christina, they had a good way of presenting the other side, and that's why they're sitting here. And they should represent the view of traditional project management in this room. Don't see them as evil, they are not. They're on the right side. So they're on the right side. The second person I would like to introduce to you is Daniel Mezick. We already heard the keynote this morning. Thanks a lot for that. I was in your workshop yesterday. That was great. So I can only always ask you to go to openspaceagility.com and have a look at it yourself. And the third one, I already introduced him once today. I don't want to bother again. So it's Dave, Dave West, CEO and COO and product owner and whatever from Scrum.org.
Yeah, for one person, I need a little bit longer. So first, the man who was able to crack the system of unproductivity. West Point graduate, former fighter pilot, admirer of John Boyd and his OODA loop, cancer researcher, CTO of 11 software companies, co-signer of the so-called Agile Manifesto. You see him on every Scrum guide. Together with Ken Schwaber, he is the co-creator of Scrum, and his attitude is, when you have time to think about the introduction of Scrum, then your business problem might be way too small. A warm welcome for Jeff Sutherland. Okay, let's start the first question to Jeff. Okay, from a formal project management approach, there are certain ways of introducing Scrum and doing projects. There might be some hybrid ways of doing that, or introducing more Scrum. Well, my first question is it right from a perspective of a formal project management education? Is that right, that your only formal project management education is a book about chemical engineering for undergraduate students? Is that right?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I'm asking you.
I have never done formal project management. I was hired out of a medical school into a bank. I looked at what they were doing. I was shocked. I went to the CEO. I said, "Have you noticed all your projects are late?" He said, "Yes, the customers are screaming." I said, what they're doing down there, they have these big charts on the walls. Every task has a name and a date, and if one of them is missed, the whole project slides to the right and it's late. I said, "I've calculated the probability of lateness, and it's 0.99999999999." And he said, "What should I do about it?" And I said, "Give me the worst business unit in the bank and I'll show you." That was 1983, and we did the first prototype of Scrum. So I always thought that traditional project management was just a wrong approach to development. I had been working with Bell Labs for 10 years, and the people I worked with did not do that. So it never made sense to me in 1983, and it never has made sense since then. And what we found is that if you talk to the experts, as Ken Schwaber did when we joined forces, he went to DuPont to meet with the leading process experts in the world and describe what we were doing, and they said, the predictive process you call waterfall is suitable only if there are 3 or 4% changes in requirements during development. Is that the case? And Ken said, "No, it's over 50%. And they started laughing at him. And Ken said, "Why are you laughing?" They said, "Because you must have a lot of exploding projects. Do you have exploding projects?" And Ken says, "Yes." They said, "Okay, here is the book, the Bible of Process Control Engineering. There's a chapter called Empirical Process Control. It's based on inspecting and adapting. Go back to that software world and implement that chapter. Because what you're doing is a totally inappropriate process for the work." So we got, formal verification of what seemed obvious to me all those years before Scrum. What more can I say? That's my answer.
So, Daniel, you were working with lots of executives too. In the beginning of an Agile transition, you talked to the executives. Jeff, you had some arguments. Okay, you had the facts here that something is going wrong. Daniel, in your context, when you talk to these executives, what's the first thing the executives say when you talk about Agile transitions?
They want it better, faster, cheaper, and now. That's usually what they say.
What can we do about that? So how, in your opinion, should we tackle this request for better, cheaper, faster?
Well, to build on what Jeff said, I think what we want to do is we want to use empiricism to teach empiricism, right? So a lecture is not going to do it. So you want to invite them to try something empirical. So my suggestion is to find out what they're willing to do by inviting them into something like making a meeting optional. If they're willing to do this, they will get direct experience in what self-organization, self-management actually is. And then when this happens, and there's many surprises, there's a context where the executives themselves are now pulling it out of me instead of me pushing it on them, right? So they experience the optional meeting and they go, wow, people that I thought would come to the meeting didn't, yet many that I thought would or didn't well, I thought wouldn't come, actually did attend. And it was really great. We had only passionate and responsible people there. And it was actually really cool. I had no idea. I didn't expect that. And then there's a series of questions that come out. And now you have a context for talking about empirical process control and empiricism in general. That's usually what I do. A lecture doesn't really cut it. They need to learn through direct experience, and there's a certain meta to that that's very powerful.
That's really interesting. What I feel, and I mean, obviously, it's because we were in the workshop together, we have that fear of traditional management. So, Wolfram, you made your point very clearly yesterday. Maybe you want to answer on this fear?
The fear of, if you see it from the executive point of view, they would like to have the company being more agile or adapt to Scrum because it's getting twice the work done in half of the time. Yes. If you look at the middle management so far, they fear about their job positions. If you look at the project manager's point of view, there's not even one single word. Of course, there is not one single word mentioned as project manager in the Scrum Guide. So when we started the transition, they asked, will I be here in the next 3 months from now? And if you ask about the lead architects who have their single position now because of the special knowledge they had not been sharing amongst the company, so they had these built up their silos, their reputation on that one. So they got their salary increase because of that one. And they were not able to share that one. So they are also singled out immediately and resist openly or hidden. So this is the fear of the people there.
How can we tackle that? I would like to hear Dave's point on that because in your keynote you talked about this supernova that we are in, and I would like to get your point on this because this fear is real. It's not something that's made up.
Yeah, of course it's real. I mean, these people have got mortgages, they've got kids in college, they've got their life invested in a set of roles, traditional project management roles and skills. They've done their PMBOK, they've got a, of course it's real. I mean, you've got to feel for those people. So, but when on one hand I want to feel for those people, and then I'm like, what would Genghis Khan do, And so part of me sort of says, sometimes we have to move on, we have to change. And I wonder if these people, given the right environment, given the right situation, can change and can learn to change. I like the model you talk about, self-selection, actually going in and picking. But I also think that we have to help these people change as well. I don't think we can just sort of discard them, like Craig says, or have a meeting where they have 3 envelopes, all that kind of stuff. So I think we have to provide a path for them, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't work. So we have to find other ways that do.
Does it help? Christina, you come from a highly regulated environment, the medical industry. So your company creates products for medical healthcare. So does that help?
Yeah, I would like to say something about fear. Because, as you said, we have an environment, but we also have an external environment. And now the external environment is very active. We have very active drivers there, technology, society is changing, and this causes a lot of uncertainty. So, and this uncertainty also causes fear. And if we now go into Agile, we increase this uncertainty, and this is something we cannot just afford, to increase uncertainty and to increase fear. So this is why we say, okay, let's stay in this stable, comfortable zone and produce our products so that we can then help the customers.
I mean, this is a huge problem, isn't it? I mean, the bottom line is, so the Industrial Revolution came along, and there was a huge, people that were working on, traditional approaches, the farming model, were suddenly being replaced by machines, by things like this. And what we're proposing is a fundamental change to the way in which organizations are constructed in response to a variable market. So this is a fundamental, and obviously there was the Luddites back in the Industrial Revolution. They threw their clogs in, and there was huge amount of famine. You know, people died because of this. You know, there's revolutions in France because of this, in particular. They would have been in England, but we were all drunk. We missed it. So, so here's a word of wisdom: get them drunk. That you know, Denmark's the happiest country in the world, or the second happiest country in the world. I wonder why. Yes. Anyway, but the point is that we have to look at mechanisms to allow them to change. We have to provide them with training. We have to give them the freedom. You know, Zuckerberg's talking about a minimum wage for everybody in the world. You know, these sort of things, because ultimately I think there's a lot of wasted. I mean, Jeff, I mean, all that waste that you see in these traditional organizations that could be, you know, putting men on Mars, and women, hopefully. Otherwise, men would get stupid and do silly things. But yeah, you know, all that waste of solving cancer that we're not doing, we're not managing to deliver on because of this. And just by putting our head in the sand isn't going to fix it, because we're going to be negated. Other organizations are going to come. Tesla's going to be the next BMW. You know, there's going to be another company that takes BMW. You know, that's the reality.
You know, what I've seen is really leadership is key. I've had the good fortune to be in a number of companies where I've been in the position where I could drive this. And one of the largest ones was now GE Healthcare. I had a group of about 40, 50 managers. I got them all in the room. I said, we're moving to Scrum. If you're a manager, you probably have some valuable talent. You're probably a leader. So every one of you in here is probably going to be leading a team and also be a member of a team. So if we're doing a Scrum, you're going to be a Scrum team member on a team. And if you're leading a team, you're going to be some kind of Scrum Master. And let's figure out this morning how it's going to be organized. And by the end of the morning, we had the new organization. And I was there for 4 or 5 years, and we didn't have a lot of, I mean, we had problems, but it wasn't this kind of problem. And I didn't have to get rid of any managers. They all survived, they all had a job, and most of them had a lot more fun in the Scrum. But you know, Scrum is optional. So is survival. I mean, and if you don't have a reason to change, humans don't like to change. And one of the things, we were training the people at MIT, the MIT IT force, which is still in a rather disruptive state, but the leadership told me that you need to teach them what Professor Sharma's teaching at the MIT Business School. And so we had to go back to what Professor Sharma's teaching. And basically what he's teaching is every organization in the world today, because of the pace of change, is driven by fear. And when you're driven by fear, you go into a reactive mode and you download old behavior patterns and you execute them. You even defend them that they're right. Like, nobody gets fired for buying IBM hardware, but that's what they used to say, right? Now they're still saying, you know, project management is okay, but, you know, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, and other companies like that are not doing project management. And now that Amazon is taking over all the ships moving cargo from China to the United States, Maersk here in Europe, we work with them, they're worried. So the question, is there fear of going out of business greater than their fear of change? That's really. And so how are you going to go through that? You know, what are those 2 cliffs in Greece off the shore? There was kind of two, what is it? Yeah, you kind of have to go through that narrow channel. And to do it, it requires courage, which is one of the Scrum values.
So that's an interesting point. I heard you say executive management. We need them somehow. I also heard you say to tackle fear. This goes back a bit to what I heard yesterday from Daniel when we were talking about this invitation-based way of working. But my first reaction to that was this will increase the fear. Could you tell us something about that?
Yeah, there's a movie star, Woody Allen, in one of his movies. He said something like, on the one hand, we face a life of complete depression. On the other, sudden death and annihilation. God help us to make the right choice. And it's kind of like that. I think that's what Jeff's talking about. So here's what I say. I say there's nothing more comforting than a story about certainty. And we all want certainty because that lowers our fear, lowers our worries and anxieties. And we're all going to have to get good at sitting with the state of not knowing the answer right now. And that's a particularly acute problem with engineers because we get paid for right answers, we're solution providers, we're creatives, and we get, basically, if we don't know the answer, maybe we're not very good engineers is sort of the ethic in engineering, right? So we're going to have to get a little better at this. When we start these projects, the cone of uncertainty is very wide. It's basically 2 standard deviations wide. We're basically making a wild-ass guess about when the project's going to come in at the beginning, and it's only through direct experience that we learn what is adjacently possible. And I think a lot of times that we're sold a story about certainty that's completely false, but we're willing to accept it because it feels so much better than not knowing.
The other thing is, for the younger generation, this is not a problem. We have people teaching Edge Scrum here. The kids, they say, this is a natural way of working. We can't believe that, you invented this for adults. It's just absolutely perfect for teenagers. So the kids have no problem with this. And now, when I'm in Silicon Valley, I often run into developers who have been in the business 6 or 7 years after getting out of school, and they haven't known anything except Scrum. And they can't imagine anybody would do a waterfall project. And they would refuse to work in any company that did that. It makes no sense to a young person who has a clear head. So this is really a old pattern of training problem. It's not a problem of humans being able to do it. Agile is a more natural way of working for humans. And it feels better, and people have more fun doing it. So the problem is just this old mindset. Primate programming, yeah. Yeah. And change is hard. When you've done things a certain way, it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, you've always done it that way, then it's hard to change that program. So the question is there, for those who are in the situation of having this difficulty of change, is there a reason to make the change? It always comes down to, is there a reason to change? Because if there's not a reason, why do it? But if there's a reason, there's it's a pretty easy way out. It's not that hard to implement Scrum. And it's easy to get more done. It's easy to have more fun doing it. And a lot of people come to me and say, hey, my life was miserable as a project manager of waterfall projects, always late, always under the gun, never good enough. But now that I've moved into an Agile way of working, I'm having fun. I'm spending time with my kids. It's a different life. So the question is, what does it take for a person to cross over the chasm, from the old to the new?
I have one question. One vital part in Scrum, there are some certain aspects in Scrum. If you read the original paper from Nonaka and Takeuchi, and they describe the teams, how they were working. So there was a built-in instability. And that's a precondition for self-organizing teams. So, but first, in order to restart the system, you need a kind of built-in instability so they can self-organize. If you organize everything up front, you don't have self-organization. For you guys here, at which point in the Scrum transition, this kind of instability, at which point you experienced a kind of pain? When did that hurt, this instability? For Wolfram here, or Christina?
I remember that exactly September 2009. Actually, yes, it was a Monday. I was traveling to Connecticut. I was project manager there. We finished our project, yes, in time and quality, blah, blah, blah. Nevertheless, the customer was not ready. The customer said, okay, I know you're ready. Please don't leave. We still need you because we need to develop further things upon on that one. And I was there and saying, sorry, I need to release a team. What shall I do now? Okay, here's a change request. Okay, change request number 1. 4 weeks later, change request number 2. 3 weeks later, change request number 3. 2 days later, change request 3.1. I wasn't able to manage that anymore. And that was it when it really hit me hard, saying, okay, this system is not working. We have to do something about that one. And we convinced the customer to go that way. I especially thank you for that Scrum guide. That was really helpful by that time. And then it worked out. We switched to Agile, and it was working then. But that was exactly September 2009.
We also faced the pain because we are a really traditional company and we have deep-rooted beliefs. And now we can see that our deep-rooted beliefs no longer work for us. So this is the pain. We are right now in the transition and we are thinking, is this right now the right way? Because what the company is made up is now all in question. And this is what we do not want. So we feel the pain of our shared values and so on. They are all going to be changed. And we have many employees who work long enough for this company who have these shared values. And so they feel extremely the pain of now going into something. We don't know what it is, because we also heard of Scrum and Agile. But when we take a look at it outside, we can also see that many companies failed implementing Scrum and Agile. And so when we look at it, and then we ask ourselves, is it worth the pain?
From your perspective, there's a certain moment when there's maybe a tipping point. So there's instability, and everybody says, okay, yeah, we're doing Scrum, let's try something new. We're really a tough business problem, and let's try out Scrum. And then there comes a moment where this kind of instability is a little bit shaky. So then there might be a situation where managers decide, okay, no, we're moving back. We know lots of companies in Germany who have some waves. First Agile wave, and then no, we take it back. At which moment you see the tipping point where it might go back to a traditional approach from your experience here, from your 5 experience?
Christina, maybe.
Well, we have seen this because we started Agile, because we tried it out, we were curious, we started it, and we can see that only a pilot was going Agile, and this was working fine because all the other employees with their deep-rooted beliefs looked at it. But we have seen the more success we got, the higher the resistance built up because of the deep-rooted beliefs. And so there was a really clash on values, on shared values, the ones coming from Agile, different Agile values, and now our traditional values. And there was the clash. And because of this transition, and because of the high resistance coming up now from the classical way, we had to move back. There was no other way, because there was also a power struggle. Mm-hmm. We were not enough people to go Agile. And we have seen on the market that not many companies really succeeded in Agile. And so the decision was, why don't we go back to something we already know, and we already know that we can deliver products on the market.
I see.
Yeah, so when organizations get big, they value stability first and everything else second. Ever notice that? Okay, so learning is very destabilizing. Did you ever notice that? Okay, so it's really about learning versus stability, because learning is going to cause change and instability, and there's a tension there. Okay, so how nice is it to, at a retrospective to stop and take stock of your learning? Doesn't that feel good? Doesn't it have a certain luxury to it instead of going iteration after iteration without a retrospective? And don't we know that teams that ditch on the retrospective eventually backslide and they go back to less efficiency, less productivity? The retrospective is key. So here's my question to you. Why don't we have enterprise-wide retrospectives where we take stock of our learning, integrate that learning, and pause long enough to be stable in the learning? If we just keep on, the real fear is the fear of learning, because learning brings in instability. I think what we need to do is take stock periodically of the learning, integrate the learning, and build a foundation and basis for going forward from there.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back again. There needs to be a reason to change, or why change. So the people that are successful are the ones that they have no choice. And more and more companies are finding themselves in that position. And so we need to help them, again, cross that chasm.
Just to clarify, they have no choice in what? So.
I remember when I was working with O2 back some years ago, the CEO said, the price of a phone call is going to go to zero in the 5 years. We have to be a different company or we won't exist.
Okay, no choice in changing, in constant change.
The business that we had is going to zero. Whatever business we have 5 years from now is going to be completely different. So it's just not optional that we stay doing exactly what we're doing. So then they had to find a way. Now, when we're working with large companies, in Germany, everybody wants to go all at once. It's not the way that they typically do it in the United States. And it's actually, in most cases, there are some cases where all at once has really worked. With really good leadership, they can take an organization. You have a Steve Jobs type of character, they can move a whole organization. Most companies don't have that luxury, so they need to start small and get something really working. So once you have a small set of teams really working and people are happy with that, for them the uncertainty is gone and they feel like it's better than what they had before. So then you're in a position to move that to the next set of teams. And so for the last 3 years, we've been doing that at 3M, 6 to 9 teams every month or two, a rolling wave. It took us almost 3 years to roll across just their healthcare division. Then we started into the division that does all the road, the traffic signals, stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, the Lean Six Sigma leadership said, we need to take 3M globally. We've always been a lean company anyway. Scrum is the future for lean. We're going to roll it out across the whole company. And yeah, sure, there are problems. There are some people that don't want to change, but in general, there's not this massive fear that a lot of companies experience. They don't seem to. That's not their problem. So I think it's all about leadership, and then it's all about doing it incrementally so that people learn it and they feel good about it, and then you can go to the next step and the next group and the next group. And right now, I'm trying to coach some of the German companies as you boot up these Agile teams and they start working, then they need the waterfall to be more responsive. So we need to start training the waterfall to respond to the Agile initiatives. And then they learn that how to get a little more responsive and how to give back quickly, which is all about the Agile mindset. So the waterfall is even learning as we're starting to roll out teams. And I think that is actually a lot more painless than these big reorganizations. Like I was at Lufthansa last 2 weeks ago, and they said every 5 years we undergo a major reorganization. That sounds pretty scary, right? I said if you're doing Scrum, you undergo a little tiny reorganization every sprint, and you wouldn't have to do any more of these major reshuffles, and it would be more effective. So I think the systematically taking small teams, learning gradually, having them get experience, gaining back the certainty that they felt with the waterfall, so they're okay, and then going to the next group and taking a little bit at a time. It works pretty well.
I'll just add another thing, because I think one other problem that we have is we don't measure our teams effectively. I mean, yeah, the reason why they went back to waterfall model, waterfall approach, because that was the way to do it, but ultimately they didn't know that that wasn't delivering them the value, because we haven't got systemic good measures. We haven't got those. We measure IT by on time, on budget. We measure IT by service levels that are developed completely in a vacuum. We measure IT by number of tickets created, when really, ultimately, if you're getting lots of tickets, it might mean that people are actually using the bloody thing. That might be a good indicator, not a bad indicator. When you're getting no tickets, nobody's actually using the thing. The point is that we need to get good measures in place on top of our aligned to our customers, aligned to our products, and then that will help drive any change, from my experience.
Speaking of measurements, we also implemented measurements because we wanted to see if our little Agile pilot was working well or not. So we put measurements on the performance on the people. And we have seen that this was not really working. And so this was then the decision to go back to our classical known approach.
But you've got to measure the outcomes, not the motion. If you measure me on lines of code, I'm going to write a lot of bloody code. If you're going to measure me on number of defects fixed, I'm going to find a lot of defects to fix. If you measure me on the motion, I'm going to cheat that system, whatever, What we need to measure is on outcomes. We need to measure on business value. We need to measure on customer outcomes. That's the only long-term value. You've got one next to you. Oh.
There's, from my opinion, the message from the executive is here very important. Tell the story why we're doing that. Keep on telling the story why we're doing that. And eat the own dog food. Walk the talk. Be there, Agile. Not only telling it, well, with Agile now do it, and then in a command and control attitude saying, okay, where are we with our measurements so far? How is the productivity from our people? Did the velocity go up? Where are we on a very single person? So gives them and this is now coming back to the fear position, gives the people the psychological safety that they can experiment, that they're allowed to fail, learn from it, and move on forward. If this is not there, if this psychological safety is not there, there's no way Agile is going to be successful. And this is why I think it's very crucial that this is a long walk the executors need to support. If that support fails, Agile fails.
So you're saying have executives that admit that they got things wrong and they learned and they adapted? That sounds like heresy, doesn't it? Courage?
This is scary. Okay, so let's talk about executives for a minute. If you went up to your executive in your company and you asked them, what's our clear direction for the next 18 months? What might they say? This is an interesting question to ask. Another question would be, if they can answer that one, regarding the direction, what constraints are what boundary edge cases, what are the boundary conditions of our journey to this place? What are the things we're not going to do? So it's really the duty and obligation of leadership to name these two things, the direction and the boundary conditions or the constraints. If you don't have that, you don't really have good leadership, okay? And it's a duty and obligation of leadership to be able to name those two things. Secondly, I bet you if we looked at how many, the success rate of pilots compared to the success rate of Agile transformations, you know, at the enterprise level, scaling, I bet you the pilots are probably 100 times more successful. And no one would run a pilot without willing team members. That would be really ill-advised and misguided, wouldn't it? Right? So why do we get organizational amnesia? And we think we can just multiply the pilot times 100 when we completely discount or forget about the fact that the pilot was populated with willing people. So those are two things to think about as you scale. If leadership can't answer those two questions, what's the direction and what are the constraints? And if you're not purposely looking for willing people, I mean, you know, I think it's a terrible bet.
Thanks a lot. I would like to interrupt here because looking at the time, smelling the grill, the barbecue. So I would like to know if there is some question that you guys and girls have. Something you would like to ask our panelists?
Wait a second, we need a mic. Marcus.
I would just love for you to repeat that little nugget you started with, your definition of the things that leadership needs to provide, because that was great. I want to take that home.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm happy to do that because people think that working with willing people or volunteers is going to introduce some chaos. You know, and Dave, my good friend, mentioned the C word there at one point when we were discussing, you know, the use of open space. It's the duty and obligation of leadership to be able to articulate the direction and repeat it a lot so people feel safe and they know the story. Without a story, you are completely full of fear and anxiety. Leadership's job is to provide the story about the direction and potentially the vehicle, and then what are the constraints? What are the things we're not to do along the way, along the road? I mean, those things are not for people in the organization to decide. That's for leadership to decide, articulate, and repeat as early and as often as they possibly can so we can all feel safe about knowing what the story is. And this is like the why and the what. Leadership has a duty to define the why and the what. And then, and this is really important now, to stop well short of defining the how. That needs to be left to self-managed teams, self-organizing teams, Scrum teams. If leadership defines the what and the why and leaves the how to the tribe, everyone wins.
This already sounds like a great introduction to the last round, so last sentences. Before we start with that, any other questions? Cool. So coming back to our initial question, what is the smallest next step to more agility? Could you get your ideas into one sentence? I know it's very hard, Dave. Into one sentence? I am, because I'm hungry. No. Who wants to start? Yeah, that's not... Free. Who would like to start?
I would like to start. Give you place a mic here.
If I may say, I think a great thing to do is to look at your portfolio of projects and try to identify the projects that are mature enough, they're sunsetting, they're already 5 years old and so on, that might not benefit from a purely Agile approach? Probably 10, 15% of your projects, maybe 20% are like that. That's a good place to start because it means the rest of them are going to benefit from agility. But, you know, not every project's an Agile project. I think we all need to acknowledge that. Projects have a lifespan, they have a maturity level, and so on.
So just to counter that, don't do projects, do products. So I probably would focus on actually identifying what my products are. Start with the products, and hopefully they have customers. So that means build teams that are aligned to products that have defined customers, and that's where I'd start.
That's cool. So just apply it to products and we're good.
Yeah. We always start with the leadership. We have the luxury of pretty much choosing where we go, and so we won't go in unless the leadership is willing to sit down and prioritize everything in the organization. You know, once we have that clear, then we can start at the top and really say, okay, let's start the agility there if it makes sense, and then our challenge is to keep them focused. If we can get that in order, then everything else starts to flow. And if we can't get that in order, things just stay a mess.
Agreed.
Okay, the smallest next step, I think, is patience, because it takes a lot of time till you see, once you started Agile, until you see the value of it. You're going through a change, don't give up, be resilient, and continue your path. And it will take some time, but it's worth it. It's worth the journey.
I have a question for Jeff. Jeff, do you think that the leaders doing their leadership work in an Agile way would be productive early in an Agile adoption?
Definitely. I mean, the leadership, here's the problem. I was at a Scrum gathering about a month ago, and these are all experienced Scrum people, 1,000 people in the room. I said, okay, how many of you are in a big Agile environment where the management is not Agile? They're sitting in their offices with waterfall thinking, and they think Agile is something down in the trenches. We put this running wheel called Agile, and you guys run faster. How many of you are in that situation? It's about the same as in San Diego, about 2/3 of the people. So to me, this is our biggest problem. The leadership, they want to go Agile because they're under pressure, but they don't know what it means, and they're not ready to walk the walk and talk the talk. So somehow we need to get what we find, what that turns around. I mean, I was doing training in Silicon Valley a while back, and the senior executive of GE's multi-billion-dollar startup in Silicon Valley comes into the beginning of the class, 2 days, certified Scrum Master. He says, I'm here to learn how to talk the talk and walk the walk. I got 1,000 people doing Scrum that sucks, and I want you to come back with me and train, not the people, my management team in Scrum. I want them all to be certified Scrum Masters, and then we're going to go to the business leaders and put them through the certified product owner course. So we need that kind of leadership. Now, how are we going to get it? I don't know. We need to. I've seen people working agility at the bottom that have actually figured out creative ways to kind of expose the leadership to new ideas and actually get them involved. You know, I think we have to break that logjam of the leadership sitting there with the old way of thinking and thinking this is going to work. That's our biggest problem, I think.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for that discussion. Thanks for your participation, and thanks for these insights, which next step we could go to more agility. Thanks a lot. We're at the end of the panel discussion, so a warm thank you for all the speakers here. Thanks a lot.